don't need a high-end designer or a lot of money to get a luxe look. Be your own interior designer.
This is Affordable Interior Design, the podcast.
Here's your host, Betsy Helmuth.
Hi, everybody. It is so great to be back with you again this week. I am joined by a very special guest. So, welcome to the podcast, Paige.
Thank you very much. I'm so excited to be here.
Well, I'm excited to have you, and I know our listeners will be excited once they hear a little bit more about you. So, why don't you share who you are, what you do? Tell us more.
All right. So, my name is Paige. I am a full-time content creator, business owner, and my content kind of centers around a farmhouse that my husband and I bought about 4 years ago. And it was an absolute dumpster fire. And so we have spent the last 4 years renovating it, and renovating it kind of in the way that it would have been done when it was built. So we've been really focusing on trying to make it look historic and feel historic, even though almost everything we do is new.
Yeah. And the thing that really drew me to you is, first of all, you have your own podcast, very
Yes.
popular and filled with great details. But so many of my clients love the farmhouse aesthetic and
Mhm.
maybe even want to use some pieces that aren't just faux rustic, something new that looks old, but maybe something that is authentically old, but they're very intimidated. And so, what I love about you is you have so many tips to share on how to incorporate pieces that truly have a history without
Yes.
making the space look dated.
Yes. So that is a huge part of kind of my style. I grew up with antiques. I love antiques. There's a bunch of different reasons, which we'll talk about very shortly. But I have never wanted to live in a museum. That's never been my goal. And so when I pick antiques and when I put them in my house, my goal is always to make sure that they're very functional and they're very useful. They just happen to be 150 or 200 years old.
Yes, exactly. And I think that's part of the reason it can feel intimidating. Also, sometimes these things need to be updated, refurbished, things like that. So, when you're looking to buy something secondhand, maybe it's not as old as you mentioned, but what should you be looking for? I go into these consignment shops and thrift stores, and it's hard to spot the gem.
Yes. So the go on a little bit of a tangent here about why I shop secondhand. Part of it is just finances. It took me a long time to figure out my style, a long time to figure out what I liked, and I felt a lot better about taking a risk on something if I bought it secondhand because it was almost always cheaper. And usually, if I bought it from somebody, I can sell it to somebody. So it was very easy to not really lose a lot of money while I was trying to find my style. But the other thing about buying secondhand, especially if you go about 1950 and earlier, is that you get a huge jump in quality of the furniture pieces compared to today. And a part of this, as a little bit of a history lesson, is that prior to the Industrial Revolution of the late 1800s, everything was made by hand. So you had one guy in his shop making his chair, and he was doing it to the best of his ability. In the Industrial Revolution, and I would say up until about the 40s or 50s, things were still made with that level of quality. They were just made faster. So that means there's a lot of them, and that means they're still pretty sturdy. So you can find very good pieces of furniture for not a lot of money. And that's a huge reason that I go thrifting and antiquing, is because I don't want to go to IKEA and spend $300 on a side chair. I would rather spend $50 on a side chair and see if it's what I like instead. So when you're buying things secondhand, you really are looking for that quality. You're looking for that affordability, and then it also gives you kind of a uniqueness that a lot of times, if you're buying something, mass manufactured today, you may not get that same kind of special feeling. If that makes
Totally.
sense.
Yes. It definitely lacks that special feeling today. You don't want your whole house looking like Wayfair or looking like an old piece knockoff. But
Right.
also, sometimes I worry when I look around the stores, like, is this piece going to hold up? Is it going to smell? So, how can I know what's going to be a good piece to take home? And then how can I kind of bring it to today's level?
Yes. So there are obviously people who, buy pieces that are completely trashed and totally redo them. And that's outside of like most people's, I think, wheelhouse when they start looking for thrifted things. So the first thing that you really want to avoid is anything that has visible pieces of the furniture missing. So if you have a leg that's broken off, if you have veneer that's missing, if you have a chunk bitten out of the top or something, if you have fabric that's totally shredded, it's not that you can't buy them, it's just that's not a great place to start. The kind of sweet spot for finding things secondhand is finding somebody who doesn't know what they have and took good care of it. That's like the best option, and it takes a little bit of looking for that. But to immediately discount things, it's like if it's broken, if there are pieces missing, if it's wobbly, if the fabric's torn, just kind of avoid that to start. Things that are not red flags are things like scratches. If you have a beautiful wood table and there's a big scratch down the top of it, but you can get it for $50, that is a very fixable problem. If you have an upholstered chair, a lot of times these antiques have wood and fabric together, and at that seam there's trim that they
Yeah.
kind of just cover the upholstery nails with. If that trim is there but falling off, totally fixable. A little bit of fabric glue and 10 minutes and you can put that right back and it's not a big deal. If the surface is kind of dry and dull, and it's hard to explain until you see a dry piece and then you're like, oh, that's what it means. But it literally just looks like it needs moisturizer. It's kind of chalky and dusty.
Ashy. Yeah.
Yes, very ashy. It tends to get very gray. And that's the sign of really dry wood. But dry wood is extremely fixable. One of the best products out there is called Restore Finish. I think it's by a company called Howard's. And it's kind of an oil, a little bit of a stain, kind of a conditioner, and you would be amazed at how well that restores a finish, like the name says. So things like that, where it's just cosmetic damage. For scratches, there's another really great product called Old English, and I think you can buy it at like big box stores and yeah, Amazon, and it's very readily available. But you put a little bit of that on the scratch, and it will actually stain the wood underneath it. So the scratch pretty much just goes away. It conditions it and it stains the wood, and I mean it's amazing what that stuff will do.
And
So
one
if
thing
you
I find
have
intimidating about that is like those two products you mentioned, do they have like different colors that you have to choose from? Because I get a little intimidated, like, am I going to choose the wrong brown?
Yes. So they do technically have different colors. It's pretty much just light and dark. So
Okay.
if you have anything that's a cherry or a walnut or a deeper brown, if the piece of furniture could be considered a brunette, then pick the dark one. If the furniture could be considered blonde, pick the light one. But for almost everything I go with the darker version, and if you mess up, it fades in about 6 months. So you
Oh,
do it, you're like, okay, that's too dark, and then you need to go back and recondition it again 6 months later. You can just pick the lighter one,
and just on
and
a
it'll be
personal
okay.
note, I have this
Yes.
vintage, mid-century modern teak hutch that's really beautiful. It came in multiple parts, so it's like two
Hmm.
different pieces that they like put together with a 2x4, but it looks seamless. It really does. Just take my word for it.
Yes.
But they had it in a sunny spot. So where they put the pieces to kind of attach the top and bottom, it's sun stained. And so I can't ever move it from its current configuration, even though I'd rather kind of change it up. So is
Hmm.
there anything to do about like a sun stained piece or even like water damage where there's obviously a dark spot and a light spot?
So this this is just a little bit of my personality, but another reason that I buy antiques is because I don't want to feel bad if I mess them up. So if they come messed up, I'm like, "Hey, someone saved me the work." So my house is for me to live in. My house is for me to enjoy. And I have pieces that have water damage. I have pieces that have sun damage. and I just kind of don't look
Okay.
so, unfortunately, I don't have any specific tips on that because it's not something that I've ever like really addressed.
Yeah.
But if you search like how to get rid of water damage, how to get rid of sun damage, I mean, you'll come up with 1,000 blog posts of different things. And I've heard for water damage, try toothpaste and then scrub it
Oh,
in and wipe it off. So this is another big factor in why I like not spending a lot of money on my furniture because if I get something that's water stained, I get something that's damaged, I'm a lot more willing to try to fix it if I only spent $75 on the dresser.
no, that's a very good point. That's a very good point. Now, out here in New York, everybody knows what they have, so nobody's selling you anything cheap. So I bought this amazing hutch for $1,600. I, you know, I'll probably just keep the 2x4s where they are. Uh,
Yes.
but for my Pier 1 table where we put the hot Chinese that condensated down, I'm gonna try Googling. And
Yep.
also I can, as soon as you said that thirsty wood comment, I can totally see that my piece, that vintage piece that I spent a lot of money on, needs moisture. Can
Yes.
you for sure put that moisturizer, that restore finish on anything? Like,
So the restore finish, I would say, is kind of like a second or third step. The first thing I would try is actually this stuff called orange oil. It's a cleaner. There's a bunch of different brands that make it. It smells citrusy, but that is kind of a very mild cleaner and an oil in one. So if
oh,
the piece is not super dry and the finish isn't super bad, I will try the orange oil first. And then if I do that and I come back a day later and it still looks dry, I might even elevate to a wax. Howard's, who makes the Restore Finish, also makes this furniture wax that's just it's just moisturizer more concentrated. So if you have something really dry that needs a lot of moisture, the wax will help. And then if the wax doesn't, then you can try Restore Finish. So you're not going to ruin anything with any of these products. It may just take you a couple tries to figure out which level of restorative product you need for each piece. That makes
right.
sense.
Right. Well, I like those different levels, like starting with the orange oil, exploring the wax, and then moving up. I
Yep.
think that feels like something that I could kind of do, even trying it on the underneath, right? To see,
Yes.
did this solve the problem? Oh, okay, I'm ready to spend my time doing the whole
Yes.
thing. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah,
And
that's great.
the orange oil is extremely mild. If nothing else, it'll clean it and make it smell really good. And then you can see if that works. And then you just kind of have your little arsenal. And we put this on scratches and we put this on really dry stuff. And you don't. I mean, those are pretty much the four products that I use: Old English, Restore Finish, Howard's Wax, and Orange Oil. And I can save 95% of what I find on Facebook Marketplace.
That's amazing. Now, what
I
about
know.
fabrics? Do you even go there with the fabrics? Like, if there's a stain, how do you know what upholstered pieces are worth salvaging?
So this is a very much a personal preference thing. Some people get really creeped out about the idea of buying vintage things with fabric because they're like, what if there's, you always hear about bed bugs and what if it smells bad? And I I kind of get blind to how pretty the piece is and don't really think about those things. I'm like, "Oh, that's a couch from 1835. I don't really care what the fabric is. I want it." But the biggest thing with fabric is if you have a tear, there's not really anything you can do about it. You can put pillows over it, you might be able to whip stitch it, but if there's a tear, it usually means the fabric is brittle and it'll probably keep happening. That hasn't stopped me buying things with tears in it, but it's just something to notice if you are kind of getting into this antiquing journey or thrifting journey. Now, if a piece does have a particularly musty smell, or I just feel like I bought some things that I could just tell they're dusty, the best thing that I have used is a small carpet cleaner. So not like a full push carpet steamer, but a little handheld one. I think I have a Bissell one, and the head on it's like 2 or 3 inches long. And so you can put a little bit of fabric cleaner in that water. You can spray down your whole piece, and then you can kind of suck out that water, and that will do wonders for getting stuff clean.
I do have one of those because I have pets.
Very useful.
And so I've got my
Yes.
little, yeah, I have pets and I have a husband who spills diet soda quite regularly. So,
Yes.
so I have my Bissell as well. I got it on Wayfair. I can't remember the exact name, but it was like the pet one.
Yes.
Because we have
Yes.
an angry Siamese. Likes to show her displeasure. But it would also work for antique furniture.
Yes, it does. Yes. And so that's really good, just to get out dust and dirt. If you're really concerned about it, obviously you can have it reupholstered, because a lot of these pieces, they're not pine frames like a lot of furniture is today. They're heavy, oak and walnut and substantial frames, so they can handle being reupholstered if you want to tackle that yourself or you want to take it to get reupholstered. But if you watch and you kind of start looking at what's out there, you can find some incredible pieces, that really don't need much.
Yeah, it's very exciting, especially if you're looking online, because like I said, in the New York area, it's so saturated here. Everybody knows exactly what they've got. They're going to charge you a arm and a leg. But I will go on Etsy. I'll see these amazing vintage pieces, but they're so far away. I'm like, this piece is in Michigan. I
Yes.
really want it, but there's just
Yes.
no way. Like, I'm not driving there. I'm not paying someone. I don't even know how to get it here. So, how can we take advantage of those amazing deals now that they can be found online?
So this, was a discovery of mine when I purchased my dining room table. And it's one of the best things ever. It's called U Ship, like the letter U and then SHIP. And this is basically, Uber for freight. So people who are transporting things, driving across the country and have extra room in trailers or in the backs of trucks, they will bid on jobs to move things for you. And it is wonderful. So the table in my dining room, it's actually called a wake table because the dimensions of it, it's from about 1850, 1860. The dimensions of it were appropriate for displaying somebody at a wake. That's just what it was.
No,
Yes. Because in a
like
lot of these
laying
old
out the
houses,
body.
yes,
Yes.
because a lot of these old houses, especially we're out in the country, funeral homes weren't really a thing. Like, everything was in the parlor. So you would have this table that was big enough to serve as the wake table and also use as your dining room table.
Well, you know what's so
I
funny
know.
about that is I was reading a book a few years back, and living room, the term came because they no longer were going to have funerals or dead bodies in there. So they call it living room as opposed to parlor now,
Oh my
because it was like a
gosh.
delineation. We don't do that anymore. We're a contemporary home. So it's living room now.
I didn't know that. That is a
Isn't that
fantastic
funny?
piece of trivia.
Yeah. So put your wake table in your living room.
Yes. So,
Yeah.
but
Wow.
what happened with this table is I bought it for the kitchen, then it ended up not fitting in the kitchen, so now it's in my dining room. But I saw it, and it was in New Jersey, and I'm in Kentucky, and I was like, I'm not going to make a 15-hour trip to New Jersey to go get this table, but it was $350, and it's walnut, and it's 6 feet by 5.5 feet. It seats like 8 people. It was this huge, amazing, gorgeous table. Literally never seen anything like it, and I've been antiquing for a while. So I was like, how the heck am I supposed to get this here? So in true fashion, I bought it on eBay and then decided I would figure out how to get it later.
Wow.
But I was like, that was maybe a little bit of a backwards order of operations there. But then I found this company, Uship. And so what I did is I made a listing on there and I said, I have this table. It's going from this address to this address. Here's my budget. And I did set my budget a little bit higher than they recommended because I had it set low initially. And I got a bid from a guy who said he would put it in the back of a pickup and there was going to be rain. I was like,
Oh,
I don't know about that. So I think I paid 250 or $300 for them to pick it up in New Jersey and deliver it here to my house. So for $600 or so, I got this table. And every comparable listing I could find of similar tables had them like $1,000, $1,500, $2,000. So it was, to me, it was a great steal, even though I had to pay so much for shipping. So if you have like a big metropolitan area, like say you're 3 hours outside of Philadelphia or something, and you find something that's great, you can have it shipped for just a little bit more, and you might be able to kind of offset some of those prices like you were talking about that you have in New York.
Well, it really opens up the whole country to you in terms of where I could be looking, because I
Right.
would just put my blinders on and be like, that's a nice to have, but it's never going to happen. Even new pieces, it's so liberating. Like, I wanted this really big custom shelving unit from Etsy. It was going to come from like Idaho. It's
Yeah.
not going to be worth it for me.
Right.
I'm not certainly going there and then to pay them, and I don't even know. But this makes it seem so much more manageable and
Right.
exciting. Yeah.
And I mean, you'll have your budget, obviously, and sometimes things may still be outside of your budget. But if you know I'm willing to spend this much, then you can look outside of your area for pieces that might be cheaper. Because like here in the Midwest, antiques are pretty cheap. We have a lot of them. I mean, I can get parlor chairs for $30 all day long.
Don't rub it
um,
in. That is so great.
Sorry,
I'm
I'm not
so
bragging.
jealous. Yeah. Yeah.
You know,
Well, speaking of, when you go into these places or even when you're shopping online, is it okay to haggle? Is it okay to negotiate? I don't know if it's expected, if it's rude. Is there a different protocol online than in person? Like, what does that look like?
so the biggest thing about haggling is that you have to be okay with the price. And you also have to have a little bit of knowledge of how expensive things are in your area. I think it was 3 years ago, and I still think about this chair. I saw this chair. It was probably from about 1840. It was stunning. It's like, I really want that. The seller had it listed, I think, for like $170 or something. And I know from experience that those kind of chairs around here go for like 30 to 50.
Oh,
So I didn't even offer on that because I knew that that seller was so far out of the realistic range that I was going to be insulting if I said, "Hey, will you take 50 for it?"
right.
Now that being said, for things that are not ridiculously priced, I assume that the seller has posted it about 20% higher than what they want to get. So I try to meet them about 20% lower. I don't lowball.
Mm.
I don't I don't see something that's 200 and say, "Will you take 50?" If I saw something I wanted that said that was 200, depending on how long it had been posted, if it's been posted for multiple weeks, I might offer 150. And then if they said we can do 175, I'd be like, "Good." If it was just posted and I desperately need it, I might not even haggle.
Right.
Because
Right.
the thing with haggling is you have to be willing to lose it. You have to be willing
Right.
to either pay their full price or risk that they won't come down low enough.
Right. And in person, I just don't even know how to start that conversation.
Okay, got it. So we have a really, really great local antique fair here. It's in person. There's like 100 vendors, and we go every single month. And so I'm like, I got this. Basically, you can go up to them and say, "I see you have $30 on this. Would you take 25?" And then they can go, "Well, we had a lot of interest in that, so I'm going to leave it at 30." You can say, "Okay, thank you." And if you don't want it, you just walk away. You say, "Thank you very much." And if you want a little bit of like a softer um, turn down, you can say, "I'll think about it," and you put it down, then you walk away. But if you go up and you say, "You have 30 on this, will you take 25?" And they go, "Yeah, I'll take 25." Then you pay them the cash and you take your thing and you go away. So it's just being very polite, not being a jerk about stuff. And there is also, I kind of think of like antique and thrifting karma as a real thing. That if I just kind of get the sense that someone has already priced this really low, it's really fair, I will just pay full price. And in my experience, that comes back in ridiculously good finds later.
Yeah,
So,
and I'm sure they're very grateful to be able to avoid that step. It's kind of a little win for them. But I think
right.
what I'm hearing is, sometimes I'll look at a piece and be like, oh my gosh, that is so overpriced. And I'll want to offer for it. But I think leading with that, saying, I know that this is worth X. Could I get this instead? I loved how
Yes.
you kind of repeated their price versus kind of judging their price. So saying, I see that this
Yes.
is $30. Would you take this instead? So it's really not judgmental, not accusatory. It's open,
Hmm.
but
And
yeah.
the worst that they can say is no. That's the thing. It's like it feels almost confrontational in a way that, like, when I first started haggling, I was like, "Oh, I don't wanna, like, piss them off or offend them or anything." But it's like the worst they can say is, "No, I want full price for that." And then if that's the case and you're not willing to pay it, then it's okay. We're not compatible with this sale. But the best case scenario, um, I heard of a woman once who she wanted this antique uh, bookcase, and it had been listed for like 9 months or something at $2,000. And she actually said, "I love this piece. I would love to give it a home, but really all I can do is 500." And the woman took it.
No.
Yes. So she got this beautiful knockdown, bookcase for $500. So I think if you keep it respectful, you keep it friendly, you smile, you say, "This is a wonderful piece. I'm really interested in it. Would you take this amount?" That'll get you pretty far.
Well,
And
she
then if
kinda
they
did
say
that
no,
emotional plea as well. "I'd love to give it a home. I
yes.
just love your piece so much." So kind of that complimenting, that nurturing before she goes
Yes.
in with her, yeah. But,
Yep.
how do you do that on, of course, eBay has, like, bidding, so that's pretty clear. But how do you do that, or do you do that on a site like Etsy? On a site like Cherish, right? Where you see
Yes.
this piece, is there room to negotiate? Can you message the seller, or is that sort of just take it or leave it?
I mean, it's really a piece by piece basis. I tend not to use Cherish
Mm,
because they price on the high end of what I think is reasonable.
that's where I
And
got
I,
my hunch. So I hear you.
yes,
I totally hear you.
yes. And I know, just because I've been buying things secondhand and on, Facebook Marketplace and eBay and Craigslist for enough years, I know when I can find something similar for a better
Mm,
price. So Cherish, I kind of avoid entirely
mm.
just for cost savings purposes. But again, you can always ask. They can always say no. You can always message the seller and say, "I'd really love this. Could you reduce the price?" A lot of times eBay has a make an offer section,
Right.
and so you can do it that way, and that's kind of a mm, eBay curated way to do this haggling without having to do it. But it's a matter of how much it's worth to you. Is it worth the emotional discomfort to save $30 by asking them to lower their price? And there are times when I've wanted something from a seller that I can just tell is not going to be receptive and maybe is kind of rude, and I will just pay full price because I don't feel like dealing with them.
Totally.
So
We all
it's
know that person in the
yes,
antique shop who's scowling at
yes,
you, making sure you don't touch things.
yeah.
Yeah, that's not the person.
Yes. And unfortunately, a lot of times I will then kind of develop a grudge against that seller and not look at their stuff anymore. So I'm like, "Well, you weren't nice to me."
I get that.
you know? But if you ask and you're respectful and you're polite, and you don't try to lowball, again, aiming for that like 20 to 30% below their asking price, if they get offended by that, in my mind, that's kind of on them. You're not being rude at that point. You're not asking for half. You're just assuming that they built some negotiation into the price.
Yeah, I love that, assuming that they're willing to wiggle 20%. That's a really
Yes.
helpful figure that would give me a comfort zone so it's not insulting.
Yes.
Do you
Yes.
have any feelings on auctions?
So the difficulty with auctions is that you could get into a situation where you pay too much. So if you're willing to pay $100 and somebody else is willing to pay $100, one of you is going to pay 110, which means one of you overpays. So I
Mm,
will do auctions. I will do some eBay auctions if I'm really really committed to the piece. I have one rug in this house that I had been looking for rugs and I hadn't found anything, and I found this auction. I said, okay, I'm willing to overpay for this because this is the perfect rug. Some people really like kind of the thrill of the auction and driving up the price and kind of the emotional part of it. I don't.
yeah,
I'm like,
yeah.
I thrift and I antique so that I can save money, and auctions are not always the best place to do that.
Well, I couldn't agree with you more. My dad was an auctioneer, so I love auctions. Like, I always have like one eye open, but every time I go to an auction, I overpay. Whether it's an
Yes.
eBay online auction, because you do get caught up in the moment.
Yep.
And then you kind of get into the win. It's almost like gambling
Yes.
versus getting into the value, and seeing how much somebody else wants it makes you want it more.
Yes.
So
So
then I
there
kind of lose my perspective.
mhm. So there's a lot of psychological stuff that goes on in auctions. And again, just because I look so often, and that's actually a great tip if you're trying to find something, I keep about 5 things in my head at once that I'm looking for. So maybe a table and a rug and a dresser. And I spend about 5 minutes a day looking on Facebook and Craigslist just to see if, just because if something comes up and you really want it, you want to be the first one to find it. Um, but being at an auction, you kind of lose that ability to really hone in on what you want because you've got this emotional like fight going on. And so I just prefer not to mess with it.
And everybody sees it at once, so
Yes.
whether it was released in a catalog ahead of time or online, you didn't get there first.
Right.
And so you're kind of just playing a more complicated, aggressive game.
Yes.
You're
So
against
I
market.
much prefer finding things on Craigslist or Facebook Marketplace or even at my antique fair, which I know those people go to auctions, they get them for cheaper, and then they do charge me a little bit of a markup. But the markup is worth it for me to not have to fight with people.
Right, right. And maybe they buy like entire lots and things.
Yes.
So that helps to keep it affordable for them. Well, this has
Yes.
been so amazing. I know a lot of my clients, certainly, and I'm sure our listeners get intimidated. It's so much easier to click and buy from Crate and Barrel,
Hmm.
so much easier to find something on Joss and Main, but it won't have that quality. It won't have that
Yep.
integrity. And I do think there's something to having a little history, a little bit of
Yes.
a little ghost inside your furniture that just somebody else used this in a slightly different way. It's the reason I adore old homes.
Hmm.
And I mean, I don't necessarily want a dead body on my dining table, but
Understandably.
but still, I'm intrigued. I'm going to go look up wake table right after this. So, Paige, thank you so much for being on my show. Please tell people where they can find you, where they can hear about your podcast like I did.
Yes, so I have a podcast. It's called the Vernacular Life Podcast. We talk about antiques and a lot of kind of old fashioned handicrafts, sewing, cooking, food preservation, basically anything that might go on in our turn of the century farmhouse. And then you can follow along with our home renovation on Instagram at Farmhouse Vernacular and on our YouTube channel, which is also Farmhouse Vernacular.
Well, thank you so much for being on the show. I'm sure this will not be our last conversation, and I really appreciate all your tips.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
Of course, of course. Well, everyone, until next time, go forth and shop on your Facebook Marketplace with confidence. All right, bye.
Bye.
A big thank you to Aton and the Embassy who wrote our theme song. A shout out to Catherine Heller who owns the podcast shop and is our editor extraordinaire. We also want to thank Ginny Sunasan and her team at the Savvy Podcast Agency for their help with our social, our YouTube channel, and so much more. We also want to thank Uploft, which is our parent company who supports this podcast. And lastly, we owe a huge debt of gratitude to you. Thank you so much for tuning in and for all your support.